Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Q&A Cafe for SAP Business by Design. Today, our topic is supply chain visibility, and we have our one and only Laura Hercalo here to present that to you. Everyone will be on mute for the duration of the session, so please use the questions or the chat box if you have a question about something, and we'll try to get to them throughout. I'm going to assist Laura with that as my role in this. We are recording, so the recording will send on over to you after this is done. It's an automated tool that sends out an email with the recording about 2 days after, so you'll get it on Friday, as well as a registration link for our next session, which is next Wednesday, December 9th. It's all about locations and SAP Business by Design with Ken Bates, who is one of our esteemed colleagues who is super knowledgeable in ByDesign as well. So without further ado, oh, and also I put in handouts. This is just the PowerPoint presentation that you're seeing on your screen right now. If you go into the handouts section, you'll find a link, you can download it. So I'm going to put myself on mute and I will hand it over to Laura.
Great, thanks, Kayla. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the presentation today. I'm excited to help you maybe streamline some areas in your supply chain management areas so that either you don't understand why things happen or where are these things coming from, or just how to make your lives a little bit easier. As Kayla mentioned, if you have any questions during the presentation, just feel free to throw it in the chat or the questions, and we'll get to it, or we'll also open up at the end. And then you can also always feel free to email me at the end, after, if there's any questions that you need answered at the end of this, you can always email me at laura.hercalo@vistaviewsolutions.com. All right, so we have 1 hour to go through a lot of stuff in ByDesign, and probably at points if you have any feedback after this and you want to split up any of these topics and dive deeper in subsequent sessions, feel free again to reach out to Kayla, your customer success representative. But today we're going to start at the basics. So on the foundation, when you go into the planning tab, if you're not necessarily using any of the functions of planning, you're not using MRP currently within ByDesign, it's a super valuable tool for you to use to automate a lot of things that I know from my end in sales processes that people are doing offline and spreadsheets and things like that, and it becomes pretty cumbersome. So SAP can really take over a lot of those areas for you. And so we'll go through a lot of the stuff within the item master so you can get a little foundational understanding of that. Then we'll look at supply planning and supply control. And then we'll look at exceptions. And again, this is probably one of the areas that is one of the most valuable areas within the supply planning mechanism, to really just highlight to you where there's blips in the supply chain and where you need to start taking some action. And so we'll dig a little bit deeper into what those exceptions are, how do you identify them, what do you do when you see them? And then we'll go back and we'll kind of turn around from more of the sales end of the house and look at availability. So we'll jump back into the item master and kind of look at the availability confirmation tab and those different options that are in there and how they work, and then how they relate to your available to promise when you're creating a sales order. And then we'll go back into outbound logistics control. So once you actually have the demand in your system, how you can start to juggle things around and how you can allow the system to automate updates to confirmations, do reconfirmations, and shuffling around based on priorities within your organization. So with that, let's jump into the system. I'm not gonna, like I said, the presentation that I put in here is really just kind of for reference for you of what we're talking about. I don't really want to PowerPoint you to death. But as we look into our material master, obviously we have our planning option. One of the major things to know is that, once you do activate something for planning, there's not a deactivate type of button. So I can show you how you can sort of remove some of the planning options when you decide that you don't want to include it anymore, include the material within your planning again. So just kind of starting from the top, let me just, I will pop back into here. Actually, no, let's go. So you can start up at the top with the forecasting group. So the forecasting group is used for demand planning. So it's used as a grouping mechanism. We had a demand planning session a while back, and one of the key areas in there to note is that within item, you don't have to necessarily employ the same forecasting mechanisms for all items within your supply chain. You can actually group particular items, and you can group them by a forecast group, and that can allow you to do something like a multi-level plan. So let's say I'm producing pens as an example, and I produce pens in red, blue, green, and black, but I don't necessarily at any point in time know what that distribution is. I could actually create a forecasting group for pens in general, so the system would then roll up all of my demand at that top level, or all my shipments and all my sales at the kind of forecasting level, pen level, and then do a distribution down to do a statistical forecast and distribution based on history. So it's just, again, another grouping type mechanism, but it is one of those things that's only really available in the demand planning area. You're not going to see it elsewhere within the system. One of the key areas, and again, I'm going to kind of throw in some of my little tips and tricks, as if I put myself in your shoes as a supply chain planner, or as myself when I used to do this, how I would kind of go about a certain day. The planning group is a great tool when you are using supply planning to, again, it's a planning group, to be able to group your items logically together, so you can view your supply plans, view your exceptions, and reduce a lot of the noise in the system. So thinking how we used to use this, and back in my day, we would have planning groups based on a supply chain, because we had 4 or 5 different supply planners. So each of those we would employ a supply or a planning group. So then when I went to go look at my planning messages, I could just filter those out. So you'll see those planning group in various places in the supply planning area. So you'll see it as a filter for demand planning. You'll see it and it's also a grouping mechanism in demand planning along with that forecasting group. And then you'll see it in supply planning, obviously, and then it's going to be in supply control. But again, it's limited just to those particular areas. All right. So if you are using demand planning, the demand management procedure is a pretty critical piece. So if you do have demand-driven planning using forecasting, the demand management procedure is a mandatory field. So you have to have this. If you do have a forecast in the system, it won't let you do anything unless you have this demand management procedure assigned. So the major difference in here between the 4, there's 2 differences. One is the reduction of the forecast, and the other is the consumption of the forecast. So you'll see that all demand reducing forecast, what that does is it just will eat away at that forecast until it gets to 0, and then nothing else happens. So if you have a forecast for 100 and orders for that same period come in for 110, supply planning will not pick up that extra 10. So I typically would shy away from using that if you are, again, just getting into demand planning, and use one of these different consume buttons, because with the consumption piece, it will consume up to the forecast value and then take actual demand into account within supply planning. And then here there's different options of which you would select. So these are typically chosen based on the volatility of your forecast, or how accurate you think you are within your forecasting. So consuming on the current forecast only takes the current period into account. Consuming your preceding forecast will consume your current forecast, and then if there's excess demand, it'll take anything that's remaining from the previous period. If you use adjacent, it'll start with the current, then the remaining of your previous, and then it'll start eating into the next period. So those are just kind of the differences in here. You've got your different options on your procurement type, obviously external procurement, in-house production, internal procurement, which is a transfer orders. So if you have a supply network where you're moving things back and forth, you would set up your internal procurement, and that'll kick off supply transfer or stock transfer proposals. And then there's the source of supply priority rule. And so if you have something that can both be both manufactured or procured, this is a good option to use. So let's say you're typically producing something. The system will look to see if it has a released production model associated with it, and it'll default to making it in-house. But if it can't find something, so let's say you're having trouble producing a particular item, and you say, or if you're phasing it out and going to maybe a contract manufacturer or something like that, if the system doesn't find a released production model, it will default to this the procured source of supply. Your procurement lead time, obviously if it's external procurement, you'll have that in there. You've got your planning procedures, demand-driven planning. Perfect, that's where we want our MRP to really focus on. So it's always looking at any demand coming from production, sales orders, service orders, things like that. Our consumption-based planning is really just monitoring of inventory stocking levels. So it doesn't take into consideration any demand. So again, when first starting out and here looking at if you are just getting your feet wet in supply planning and you're looking at consumption-based planning, you might find some wonky things if you're just starting with consumption-based planning, because supply planning, more often than not, if again your supply chain is volatile and your demand is volatile, you might see things going negative without any sort of replenishment in the future. So always take that into account. That's why typically I'll use demand-driven planning, because I always want to take into consideration a lot of things that are coming in. But if it's your nuts and bolts and lower level supply items that you always need to have on hand, low value, high accuracy, or whatever, high volume, low cost kinds of things that you always have in stock, consumption-based planning is great. And then there's manual planning. So if you are phasing something out, you can change everything to manual planning, and then it won't generate any sort of messages or exceptions or anything like that. So you're just manually putting everything into the system. So then we'll quickly kind of run through the rest of these. Your safety lead time would be kind of taking into consideration how long it would take to replenish the safety stock. And that would typically equate to your procurement lead time, because otherwise, if you don't have this filled in for something with a safety stock, it'll assume that you're going to be able to replenish that safety stock today. And then your planning time fence is also a pretty important field, and a lot of people don't typically use this, but it is good for things that, within what this will do is it basically puts a barrier around your supply and demand within a given number of days. So basically, if I had something like a 10-day planning time fence, anything that I've planned within that 10 days, whether it's firm or not, supply planning won't touch it. It'll just assume that it's concrete and then I can manually manipulate those, but it'll always assume that it's firm, whether or not I have set it up as firmed. Your min maxes obviously are pretty straightforward, of minimum quantities that you need to order, whether it's production or purchasing. For production, great if you're doing a lot of batch size quantities or mixing or things like that. And then your rounding values, again, really great for batching in production. So I always have to put in 1,600 pounds into a mixer, things like that. Every time we kick off a production order or a purchase request, the system will round out to that nearest quantity. I also use this quite significantly if I'm doing multiple units of measure where my base unit is different than my purchasing, especially for purchasing products. It keeps me from having to manually calculate out like if I'm ordering in cases, but I want to receive in eaches or receive in pallets or something like that. This allows the system to then calculate out what the full case size is or things like that without me having to move into that. And then your maximum lot size as well is the same thing. Once I hit that maximum, it'll move itself over to another proposal. These guys down here are really for just monitoring the supply chain. So we'll look at some examples in here in a sec about your minimum days of supply. So the system does calculate based on, calculate all of your demand in the system, and it calculates kind of how much supply you have on hand to support that demand. And if it falls below a certain number of days, it'll give you a warning. So it just highlights to you that something needs to happen. It's not necessarily going to generate any messages to you, but it's saying, hey, you might want to start expediting things or order new materials. And then you've got your minimum receipt days of supply. So same thing. So this takes into account not just the stock, but also everything that you have in stock, and then everything on order and how that's covering your future demands. The minimum shelf life required it works in conjunction with lot tracked or batch tracked type items, where you set an expiration date, and then you can set that minimum shelf life required. So let's say my expiration date is December 25th, but my shelf life is 10 days. If I run the MDRO for limited identified stock maintenance, what it'll do is it'll read back. So on December, if I run it on December 15th, it'll run through that job and it'll say, okay, I've highlighted this item that it's within the shelf life. So it'll put it on a restricted status, but since it's not expired, you can still ship it out, but it just highlights to you that you've got something that's coming up on expiration, and it also excludes it from planning. Again, another little known or little unknown piece is the goods receipt processing time that might not be used a lot. And that's really the time that it would take someone that's unloading the truck, relabeling, inspecting, putting away in the racks, how much time it takes. Because again, the system's going to take into consideration when you actually need the product to either ship, satisfy a forecast, satisfy a sales order, a service order, back it up based on the lead time. So it's really doing a very much a just-in-time type operation. This goods receipt processing time gives you a little buffer, so it's not like I'm moving it and cross-docking it from the truck straight out to straight out on another truck or into the production floor. So this will back off by X amount of hours or days or whatever the proposals for purchasing. And then the last pieces on here are going to be the different lot sizing methods. So this is how supply planning is going to generate your proposals and the different groupings that they have. So you've got things like fixed lot size. So again, thinking about something like maybe, food and beverage or mixing or anything like that, where you've got standard quantities. So every time I make one, I need to make 100, or every time I make 100, I need to make 1,000. So that's going to be your fixed lot size will say that'll create individual proposals for each of those different lots, lot sizing method. Your lot for lot, perfect for make to order. Every time I bring a demand in, it's going to create a subsequent supply record. So really, again, for something like your product spec type items, or in the onesie twosie sorts of things that you really need to keep a handle on, that you want to almost essentially link your production to that particular order. That's what lot for lot's used for. So, if I had 2 orders that came in for the same item the same day or week, the system would give me 2 separate proposals for it. The periodic lot size is another one that's, I use this quite often, especially in more distribution, consumer products, things like that, that have more of a high volume, low item type count, or the same types of items that get reordered over and over again, your make to stock type stuff. The periodic lot size, or even from the purchasing side, where I'm using the same components across a lot of different items, the periodic lot size makes a ton of sense, because you can get way more efficiency in the supply chain, being able to group the demands together and bulking them into either one production order or one purchase request or purchase proposal, purchase order, as opposed to looking back at the lot for lot, many different ones, and then having to manually group them. And then you've got all of your options on the periodic lot size from day to year, and then taking that into consideration. That's always going to look at the calendar that you have set up, the calendar year that you have set up against your site. So if you're looking at, if you're not taking weekends into account for one calendar or another, you just want to take that into consideration. If you're using something that's more like quarterly or yearly, that's how the when you're using periodic lot size, how that demand is going to be calculated. And then you've got your target days of supply. So based on based on the calculations of your inventory levels, you can set up a standard number of days of supply that the system will calculate. And then your target stock level. So proposals are created when the projected stock drops below 0, in terms of when you're thinking in terms of demand-driven planning, or if available stock is below the reorder point or the safety stock. And that's when you're using consumption-based. So you'll see if I'm using demand-driven, I have all of these different options, but if I'm using consumption-based planning, I only have these 3 options. So I'm looking at more like the reorder point, safety stock, my fixed lot, lot for lot, or like target stocking levels. All right. So that is just overall the material type piece. And so we can jump into supply planning and kind of look at just a quick example of just supply planning and how it works, and some of the neat little pieces in here and things to take into consideration. So as I look into supply planning, you'll see again some of the different options that are in here. So you can create, as everybody knows, hopefully, that you can create as many different types of drop downs that you want. So you've got your options. You'll see again, you've got your planning group IDs, your planning procedure. So the one thing I mentioned, like I'm looking at things versus consumption based or demand driven planning. I can filter all those guys out as well. And then I can also choose to say which products have been verified or not. So if you think, again, more traditional ERP and verbiage, you're thinking about the messages that you get. If I'm looking at my supply planning messages, as I go through these one by one, you can set these to verified, just to indicate to yourself that, yep, I reviewed it, I looked at it, I don't want to look at it again until my next MRP run. And you'll also see anytime that there's an exception that the system is generating, these will pop up within your exceptions area, and you can quickly dive into what those exceptions are. And then you also have another option for acknowledgement. So again, that's one of the really nice things I find in here, is that there's, as you're looking through the stuff that you need to make sure that everything is straight within your supply chain, you can just acknowledge those, and then you can filter them out to say, yep, I looked at it, I reviewed it, I made the changes I need to, let's move on and we'll deal with it. All right. So as I open up my my supply plan here, so my supply demand, we can see very quickly a couple things in here where I've got, again, all my different categories that I have, whether they're sales orders, service orders, the subsequent supply of my production request, and where it's coming from. So my release production model of what's happening. You'll see other things like my production proposals, everything that's in more of that fluid type status where it's still a proposal, whether it's a production proposal or a purchase proposal. You'll always have the ability to edit or modify, change the dates, consolidate, do anything that you want to in here. If you needed to change the source of supply, so if I wanted to move it from, one production model to another, or move it to a supply, a procured part, I have that option in here. You'll find that once you do release it, you have to back out of the request to come back to this area to change that source of supply. So one of the kind of key things that I always try to instills keep things fluid until you know you need to either order them or release them, like production proposals. It's very, very easy for you to manipulate stuff within the supply and demand area or within the exceptions area before you release it. If you have experience, especially in production, of trying to back things out, it takes a little bit of unwinding to get back to the proposal stage, to be able to make changes to things. Like now we have the ability to change dates, so it becomes a little bit easier. But if you want to change sources of supply or things, or if you're trying to align your raw material supply with your production order, it's very easy to do it within here, and let the system kind of allow you to calculate back, as opposed to having to manually change a lot of stuff. So you'll see anytime that you have a supply shortage, that's all going to be highlighted in red here. Again, any sorts of exceptions you'll see highlighted in the exception phase. And really, they'll just highlight the first exception that's in there. And then you can also see, same as we did from the front screen, what those different exceptions are. You also have the option here to look at the periods. There's not a lot in this area here, but if you have more of a consistent demand across, you'll be able to see all the current demand, any of your unconsumed forecasts, all your receipts and planned receipts. So basically your full type of supply picture for a given period, which is a really nice visualization. And then you'll also see down here that inventory days of supply. So that's what the system is calculating out of how many days of supply that I do have on hand. So that goes back to the exception monitoring that that we just looked at within the item master, and that's when it drops below that certain level plus your buffer days, that's when it's going to send you out the exception. Right. One of the other nice pieces that I really like to look at from just a visualization standpoint is my material flow, and we'll look at this more on the raw material side when we do a little bit of rescheduling in a bit. But I can open up the material flow from here, and I can see the indented bill of materials for my finished product. And this will also show me what I have on hand. So again, as I mentioned, if you're doing production in ByDesign and you have your planning proposals for your production proposals sitting out there, until, I always use this mechanism to make sure that I have everything ordered and that it's coming in on time, or that I have available stock. And until I really can see that I have all the available stock, I typically wouldn't release like a production proposal out there. So it'll just, again, allows you to be fluid to react to changes in raw materials or things like that pretty quickly, and allow the system to do some replanning for you. The other area that's really nice is that this graphic that's available here too. So you can see, this purchase request that's popping out here. I will see in this purchase request or in this raw material item, if I look it up, there's definitely going to be an exception that's sitting out here that says, this thing was supposed to be here on 7/13 and it's not, and I need it for this production order, and that's why I'm going to be late. And then you also see all of your available stock as well. If you do have other proposals like purchasing proposals, those will also be available here. And then you'll see an option that you can release those, which is really nice. So if you're not dealing with a lot of end products, but you've got a lot of components that are consistent, you can just release this production or purchase proposal directly from here. Even though it'll show you within this area kind of the quantity that you actually need, it will take into account all of the demands depending on what your planning procedure is. So if you do have like a periodic lot size, even though you're looking at what the demand is just for this particular production proposal, it will take into consideration everything else and roll it up and plan it accordingly. Okay. So that is really the supply demand. Again, within the supply planning area too, you can select multiple items at a particular time. And I can open those guys up, which again, thinking about it as a planner, I can pop to next product, previous product. So I'm not constantly popping in and out of, of supply planning. Again, back in my day, select every item that we dealt with, you pop through it, look at supply demand, make your adjustments, set the verified to yes, and move on to your next product. And then as I go back, I can just, change that drop down to see anything that hasn't been verified yet. You'll also notice that you've got the ability to do ad hoc type planning runs, where it's a single level bill of materials for just like your purchased products, or you can do a multi-level bill of materials. So basically a multi-level bill of materials is a little bit different. So your single level would be like, okay, I just want to plan my finished product and nothing else below it. My multi-level, in this example, I've got a lot of stuff below this. And I want to actually take all of that into consideration when I'm doing a replan. So it'll blow through the entire structure of your bill of material and replan all the subcomponents. There's situations for each and every, for both of these different options. What this does is it generates a full planning run. So there's two options within the system, from more of a regular basis. So this, our mass data runs, so our MDROs, we can set these guys up to run at any point in time. They can run up to every 15 minutes if you want. Yet in more traditional on-premise type systems, you would typically do a net change as opposed to a full regen. Because in very complex structures and complex manufacturing, very many products, sometimes you could say that a full and total regeneration of your MRP, which would take everything out and chug through every single thing and replan every single thing, sometimes would take a full entire weekend. So again, way back in my day, we'd run a full regen on a weekend and then just do net change runs during the week. The net change really just takes into consideration anything that got updated during your last run. So new sales or service orders, if I made a change to any of the planning values within my items, those would be taken into consideration within your net change. But I can also set up for, different selection criteria based on planning groups or products, and then do things like delete all the planning proposals that aren't firm. So as you go into supply planning, if there's something that's in there, maybe you're working on trying to expedite something, and it's within the window of trying to be planned, you can set that up to exclude those or include those and kind of re-explode them. Allow planning proposals creation in the past. Don't typically recommend that because it's going to say that you should have ordered something maybe 2 weeks ago. You're always going to be starting from a negative position if you're ordering things too late, but at least you're getting a more realistic picture of your confirmations for orders. And then you can say re-explode the firm planning proposals or not, and then run multi-level planning or not. So you've got those different options, and you can set up one or many different types of runs and have those set up to do like I said, ad hoc for a group of items, or do it daily, do a net regen, do a full regen. The other area, again, that's probably not very, I'm not sure how well used it is, but I've come to rely on the supply control area almost as much, if not more, than the supply planning area. And it has a lot of really good value in it. So we can monitor everything in a group type fashion. So, thinking about, I can look the same way of my, in supply planning for things that are just like my raw materials. So my purchase items versus my produced items versus things that I'm getting internally through stock proposals. So it automatically filters out those buckets of items. Again, I think about the way I used to plan things from kind of the top level down and then execute from the bottom up. This really allows you to do that very fluidly. So for things like your purchase proposals, we can look at when your planned order date is, the planned delivery date, and things like that. This is I specifically use this area for my purchasing most specifically, because when you do look at supply demand as an example, you're seeing things like, let's see, if I'm looking in here of like my planned delivery date, you'll see that you've got an opening date, my planned order date, and then the planned delivery date. So it's taking into consideration all the lead time. So it's in this area, it's telling you exactly when you physically need to order it. But if you look at supply demand, it could lull you into a little sense of complacency in here. So if I'm opening up the product planning details, this is always telling me the dock date. So when do I actually need it for something? And so it's better for me as the planner or the purchasing person to always review this area to say, okay, when do I actually need to get this purchase order out to the supplier to give them adequate time to be able to deliver my goods. So again, I really rely on this very heavily on the purchasing side, as well as the production proposal end, where also I'm looking at things like my different items, where I can pop into these different items and look at something. This is from the production side, super awesome. This is something that just came out with 2005, that really, again, getting to the point of keeping all of your proposals fluid, especially for production, until you know that you have everything either confirmed or really in-house before you're going to ready to schedule it and release it to the shop floor. So as I'm into a finished good, I can navigate into the peg supply. So this will actually show me all of the lower level components. And what was just added is this really great tool in here. So it's showing you the component delays, whether it's a purchase proposal that hasn't been turned into a request, or a request that hasn't been done, sent into a purchase order, or a purchase order that's late. You'll see these different delays as they as they appear, and you'll be able to see exactly, where that delay is arising from, and then how many days off it's going to be. And so, again, with this visualization of the component delay, you're also able to pop into this, the material flow, just like I showed you from the supply planning area, and you can get to the same type of function from supply planning. But the one thing to note in this, and if you've played around with the functions, which, I've done it for years and years and years, this reschedule bottom up or reschedule top down, and you're like, why isn't this working? Why hasn't this moved? It's something that it's a little bit of an art that you have to play with it and figure it out of where you are when you want to initiate the function and what the response is going to be from it. So if you want to do your reschedule from the bottom up, you always have to initiate the material flow from the lowest level component. So you're always going to want to look at the raw material. So your lowest level that has that delay, you're going to open your material flow from here, and you'll see your different purchase orders and when they're supposed to be in. So these guys were all supposed to be in here on 11/4 for a production start date of 12/3. Well, we obviously know that that's not going to happen. If we pop into our graphic, we can see that you've got your production proposal that's still sitting out here, but our purchase proposals that are sent out, and we know if I even order it today, I'm not going to get those until 12/8. And so we were just looking at that peg supply for our doors. And so we know if we want to do the reschedule up, we need to select the doors. So I want to pop into my doors, and then if I do the reschedule bottom up, it'll move this production order out. If I was on my my production proposal here, you can reschedule your top down as well. So you'll see how those buttons change depending on where I'm clicking in my area. So let's reschedule from the bottom up, and I choose from the reference document. That was really quick. So that moved out. So now we're letting the system do our planning for us. It's adjusting it. It's taking into consideration the lead time. It's not having to do things in your head. And that gets to again, the whole point of keeping your proposals sort of fluid in this area before you're, until you know when your supply is actually going to be there. We can let the system kind of do the talking for us. So again, always just to reiterate that if you're doing reschedule from the bottom up, you're always going to want to do that from the lowest level component. If I was looking at the material flow from this top level and I did my graphic, nothing's going to happen in here. It's not going to reschedule anything for me. Okay. And then if I was using that reschedule top down from my top level, if I was, let's say a customer called and said, hey, I don't need this sales order for another week and I already had components ordered, or if I hadn't ordered components yet and I did a reschedule top down, it would move everything forward into the supply chain so I can see, make some adjustments on my purchase proposals or things like that. All right. Okay. Let's see, we've got 20 minutes left. Let's pop in and we'll look at the exceptions. So again, like I said, the exceptions are probably one of the more valuable areas where, again, it's more like your messages of where you need to do things and where you really need to focus your efforts. It is just exception-based planning. It's not looking through every single item and looking at supply demand and saying, I need to do something here, I need to do something there. The system is really telling you what you need to do. And what's great about the exception process is that it's independent of the MRP run. So you don't need to have MRP runs monitoring the supply chain in real time and developing these exceptions as things happen within ByDesign. So as an example, and I put this in the presentation, you'll see lots of different types of, and I actually will pop into back into the PowerPoint to show you the different exception types. So there's lots and lots of different exception types. You've got product related ones. Anytime I violate a safety stock, or if I have a stock shortage, whether it's procured or produced. And then you've got the inventory days of supply and the receipt days of supply are below the minimums. And those are going to get generated, again, based on that setting that you have within the planning tab of the item. It's going to monitor itself and it's going to tell you when you drop below any of those thresholds. You also have receipt related type of exception types. So these are the ones that are really good for you to keep abreast of. So you've got a start date in the past. Especially if you're doing a lot of handoffs between supply chain planning and maybe production planning and procurement or things like that, you're seeing that where a proposal hasn't been requested by the proposed date. So it's telling you like, hey, I need to make a phone call to someone and be like, why haven't you ordered this? Because it's impacting everything. You've got stuff that are also the availability date is in the past. So anything that's late that hasn't been confirmed yet. And then this one's an interesting one. So your proposals outside of the validity period, and it works for both purchase and production proposals. So let's say on the example of a production order, let's say you are running maybe a weekly full regen, and you've got a forecast that's sitting out for the next 12 months, and you've got one production model that's released, and it's applying it out through the rest of the year. And then someone goes in, your master data manager goes in and actually makes a change to the bill of materials and releases a new production model. Well, you actually want all the subsequent ones to pick up the new RPM. So you'll get messages in here that says, okay, you've got sources of supply here that are showing, RPM 1 versus RPM 2. Kind of gives you the trigger to go ahead and rerun that. So then you're picking up the newest things and you're not actually producing something that's like an old an old model, or if you release it, it's going to give you some errors. And then there's ones on the resource side. So the exceptions go both ways. They go for both materials and they go for capacity as well. We're not spending a lot of time on capacity today. We can do another session on that. But it will show you overloaded resources. And then there's your availability check. So this is really for your sales and service orders to make sure that you're doing what you need to do, to make sure you're not ticking off your customers and making sure that you have everything that's confirmed properly. And this all plays into the settings that you have in your availability check within your items. So you've got excess confirmations. So if there is more confirmed demand than expected receipts, this will indicate to you that you need to expedite, supply, or reconfirm demand. So again, this plays in a lot when you're thinking, when you have stuff like horizons, when you have time horizons, that maybe you have a whole lot of demand and then you have a horizon, and the system will automatically confirm everything outside of a time horizon. So you'll see that ATP excess confirmations will pop up in there, or if you have a lot of customers that are set up with an immediate delivery priority, because that basically will just confirm and release the order to the warehouse. So that could indicate to you that you need to do something there. And then ATP late or insufficient confirmation, if there is a difference between their requested date and the confirmed date or delivery. So if there's something late, there's not enough quantity, or there's not a confirmation, that will appear there. So all these ATP ones are great for sales and service orders. If you are more like the demand planner or like the warehouse manager, things to really kind of figure out if you have enough stock to satisfy your orders. And then the last one is just your planning run, whether there was an error, because there's obviously going to sometimes be errors that occur in your planning run, whether it can find a valid source of supply or things like that. And you'll see where there's an error in there. And then popping into here is the same kind of view. So, but the same capability in here to be able to open the product planning detail, so your supply demand, and then being able to drill into here. So you'll see a couple of the different options in here. So you've got a stock shortage, you've got your inventory days of supply, you've got insufficient confirmation or no confirmation, and then sort of your receipt days of supply. So a whole host of different issues that are going on with this item. And if I look at it, we can drill down and kind of see where all these are getting generated from. So you've got a sales order here that just came in. So it's showing me that I have only partial, because I have 41 available, but I'm ordering 288. So it's telling me that that I'm short, that I need the 288. And what my deviation is within that item, so how many I actually need to make up for it. And then you've got this one that has no confirmation, because the way that I have my ATP check in here is that, let's see if we have that in there. No, it's not in there. My ATP check is just looking at stock. So it's saying that I haven't even confirmed this order yet at all. I've got no stock, I've got nothing planned for it. And then it's also showing me that I have a stock shortage. So I've got this stock shortage because based on the lead time, I don't have enough for these 3 orders. And then I've got my inventory days of supply here, my receipt days of supply. So you'll see in the periods that I've only got 3 days of supply and I have a 5-day window. So it's basically giving me that warning in there that I need to take into account that I have a shortage. And then the last one was it's just a separate calculation, because it's taking into consideration sort of these different purchase proposals and all the demands, and it's calculating receipt days of supply as well. And that's showing me a warning that I'm outside of that window as well. Oops. All right, so those are different exceptions. Like I said, very, very useful. And as I walk through each of those, I can set those to acknowledged. And as I would go through and start to figure out what I need to do, I need to expedite? Do I need to change orders? Things like that. We can change that exception status from pending to acknowledged and then drop those off the list. So every day I walk in, I'm only really dealing with the things that I haven't looked at. So I'm not every day just trying to figure out, I'm going back to the old drawing board and looking at these things over and over again. We have lots of mechanisms for us to be able to filter out our items. Okay, in the last 10 minutes, we're going to look at just the availability and really I'll just focus on the outbound logistics control and the and how the confirmation calculations type of work. We'll skip over the, I'll just jump in real quickly to the availability and pop up a couple different things in here. So you've got your, again, the availability check scope in here is what I'm using when I'm determining if I can confirm the sales order or not, when sales or service order when it comes in. So you've got all of your different options. So all of your release supplies except for POs and POs within the horizon. If I'm just looking at stock, and then any various other supplies that are coming in. And then I also have the option to take into consideration a horizon. So the horizon would be, you know, typically I can either produce or procure anything within 2 weeks. If I set my horizon to 14 days, if something comes in with a request to date of 15 days, it's automatically going to confirm it because the system will assume that you have that item, or you're going to be able to get that item regardless of how you do get it. You also have the two options in here to disable the automatic ship from determination. This is used really if you are primarily a drop shipper and you don't, you're not sourcing from your internal stock. I would always disable this automatic ship from determination, because that will then default your sales orders to the drop ship as opposed to either sending it, having to procure it and send it from your stock, or having to produce it and send it from your stock. And then you've got your goods issue processing time. Just like on the inbound, the outbound, this gives your warehouse a little bit of buffer to actually produce something, because things don't magically appear and get boxed and labeled and palletized and things like that. So you would give them the option for them to be able to give them a little time to do their work. And that's set up item by item. Some things might be bulkier or less bulkier, easier or harder to pick or package or things like that. So you're not kind of doing that, just for your whole entire warehouse. So let's look at an example. So I've set up a quick example in here where I've got my items in here. Actually, this guy, let's think. There we go. Let's actually reject this and open. Okay, so let's cancel that. We'll start from scratch here. So we can look and see that I've got my order for this deco pot, for this 8-inch deco pot for 30 units. And if I looked at my stock overview for my 8-inch deco pot, we can see that we've got only 40 eaches on hand. So, and my availability is just looking at stock only, not any of the released receipts. So if I want to go in and create a new order, if I look at this order itself, I can see that if I pop this open, we're going to do this example based on the priority of the customer, so how important they are to me. I have this guy 6379 set up as a low priority, but if I come in and I enter a new order for Home Depot again, but this time it's store 6380, and they're in a normal priority. And I've got my deco pot that's sitting here. And knowing that I only have 40 in-house and I've already got 30 that have been confirmed against that order, let's say I put in another order for 30 of these guys, we're gonna see automatically ATP is gonna change. It's gonna go from a green to a yellow status because it's gonna say that I haven't, if I hover over it, you'll see that you've got the insufficient quantity, that I can only deliver 10 eaches on 12/5, and the rest are gonna go unconfirmed. So what's that gonna do? One, it's gonna give me an exception. So as soon as I release and submit this order, if I go back to the exceptions tab, I'm gonna see an ATP insufficient confirmation. So immediately, without running any sort of MRP run, the planner is getting notified automatically that they've got something that they need to act upon. So that'll indicate to them, let me rerun my planning and see what kind of proposals are getting generated from there and when I can do things. So let's go ahead and release this order. So now we're saying, just because, so we've got the two Home Depots, one's a lower one, one's a normal, one might be urgent because maybe you're getting, I don't know, maybe you're getting some fines for late deliveries or things like that. Then go into my outbound logistics control. You've got kind of your two areas, your delivery due list and your customer demand area. They act very similarly here. But again, you'll see based in here that obviously I've confirmed this order first, and I've got this one that's still saying, you know, that it's a late delivery or insufficient quantity. So just like in the exceptions tab, you've got a lot of different options in here, the same type of things where it's showing you those different exceptions for when I don't have enough and why. We can always look at our scheduled demands in here of when things are going to be executed. And again, not sure how much people are using these mass data run objects, but the confirmation update run is I feel that it's a pretty critical piece that if you're not using today, you should really look into it and start investigating the usage of it, because again, it really will keep your supply chain in line. It'll keep your confirmations up to date with the order, with orders. The one thing that I forgot to mention too is that when you are looking at supply planning, there are two options. They're in business configuration that you can, or yep, it's in scoping, where you can determine what your supply planning is looking at, whether it's the confirmed date. So when the system runs through and generates when you're expected to get something, that's what it can plan to. So it's kind of keeping up with the actual picture. But if you really want to keep in line and try to always achieve what the customer is actually asking for, what they're requesting for, the other option, and that's the way that I show it in my system, is the requested date. So you do have those two options. If you want to adjust to one or the other, you have that option. But this confirmation update run is going to take into consideration the current supply chain plan, so the current state of affairs. And what it'll do is it can in total just reconfirm everything that's out there. So if I had an order that originally when I took it, it was due to ship on 12/5, but I had a delayed purchase order and it's not coming in until 12/10. If I rerun this confirmation, basically what's going to happen is now the new confirmation of 12/10 for the shipment will pop up and everything will slide and adjust appropriately. So you're not seeing a lot of the late kind of messages. But in this example, this really allows you a ton of flexibility. And if you haven't used the scheduling runs, these can also be set to daisy chain each other, where if you've got one set of rules that you want to look at first and then slide down to another different set of rules, but run them kind of in succession from most important to least important, you can do that together within the setup of the run. But in this confirmation update, I'm basically looking at my sorting parameters. So I'm looking at my delivery priority, which is I'm looking at the Home Depot, the low versus the normal. And so what'll happen when I do run this, it's going to take this order and it's going to change that guy to a yellow because he's just low and they came in and I'm taking the same stock, and it's going to move that guy to green because I've set that based on the delivery priority. And then again, you can set up any different type of sorting mechanisms or grouping mechanisms, from product category to the order type to the type of item. You've got all kinds of different options in here. So I will go ahead. And as I mentioned, that whole run after job is that whole daisy chaining of, once that's done running, run another job. So once this goes, take a minute. And we should see these guys flip flop. And then we should be done. Let's see that. Yeah, it does take just a minute to run, or two. Guess while we're waiting for that to run, I'll see if there's anything in the chat from Kayla before we go, because I don't want to keep you, even though I've already kept you over by a minute. Kayla, is there anything in the chat?
There is not. There's no questions or comments.
All right, so there we go, magically delicious. We've got 4488 or 4448 has now taken over the confirmation of those items and resequenced those. So now I'll actually see probably an exception that's set up for that balance of that 20 that's now not confirmed because I don't have any stock in-house, right? And then your other options that you also have before you do release things to the warehouse are doing things like partial releases. So in this example, maybe I don't want to tick Home Depot in total off. I've got 40, they order 30 each. Maybe it's better if I give them 20 and 20. I can actually just set up and do a partial release of 20 here and 20 there. You can change those options, and then you can always run your availability just ad hoc as well, anytime that you need to. Right. So with that, we went through a whole bunch of different things. Hopefully you've learned maybe one or two little nuggets of information to get you a little bit more streamlined in your visibility. If there's any, like I said, any other subsequent questions, you can email me at laura.herkalo, HERKALO, @vistaviewsolutions.com. And if you have any other topics that you want to see, please absolutely email your customer success person, because we're always looking for topics that are important to you. And with that, I will bid you all adieu and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Great, thanks, Laura. We'll see you guys next week for our All About Locations and SAP Business by Design. Thank you.
Bye.